Well, g'day guys. Welcome to the podcast. This is Life in the Peloton and we are back presented by our major partner MAAP. This episode, we're going to be talking alternate roads and we're going to be talking with the Alaskan record-breaking bike adventurer, Lael Wilcox. And look, in that vein, MAAP has the new Alt Road collection dropping just around the corner on October 3. Really exciting stuff because there's heaps of new stuff coming and some remodeled existing products just like the Cargo Bibs 2.0. They've got new jerseys, they've got vests, heaps of great brand new colors as well. Plus they've also got this cool mountain bike style mesh tee. So hold tight for that release that's coming very soon to you guys. Well, like I said, right at the top, how cool is this? We're chatting with none other than Lael Wilcox. Yes, this is so exciting because look, way back on the 27th of May, it all began on 7 a.m. from Chicago, Illinois. She went out on, not just a ride around the world, but she was looking to do this, a globally connected ride. What does that mean? Well, she was trying to encourage as many of her followers and friends to join her along the way. And look, she really did do that. 108 days, 12 hours and 12 minutes later, she traveled around the world and she arrived back in Chicago where it all started, setting a brand new record for the fastest woman to ride around the world. If you followed her story, which I did closely, you heard her podcast, you would know she really did do it in her own way, making so much time to stop and meet people along the way, always with a smile on her face. I don't know how she did it. She just sounded so fun and happy as she just plugged on and did these massive, massive days. For those of us here in the Southern Hemisphere, we're coming into spring. It's beautiful and it's time to get outside and ride. And Wahoo has the Element Roam GPS bike computer to navigate where you want to go around the world if you want to be like Lael. But I know some of you up north are heading in towards the winter, and Wahoo has got you covered there too. With their fleet of indoor smart trainers and bikes, there is a setup for everyone and every budget. Head over to wahoofitness.com and get what you need to keep chasing those kilometers just like Lael did. But also here in Australia, we're preparing for the very first Dirty Docker event coming up next month on the 12th, 13th of October here in my hometown of Lancefield, right up where Lael passed through on her way around the world, of course. And we're having some training rides put on by our friends over at MAAP. We're heading out from the MAAP Lab this Sunday on the 29th and next Sunday on the 6th of October for some alternate loops around the inner and outer skirts of Melbourne. Come down with your Wahoo Element, load up your route, grab a coffee with me at the lab, and then we're going to head out for some practice or some training or whatever you want to call it and have some fun riding around Melbourne. I'll be there. I hope to see you there, and I also hope to see you up at the inaugural Dirty Docker 2. Well, guys, let's get into it. Here we go. I bring you Lael Wilcox. Lael, I was just saying you look fresher than I do. Unbelievable. Lael Wilcox. Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm so good. It's so good to talk with you, Mitch. I was thinking about you all across Australia. I learned so much out there. Australia is huge, and there are very few people. It was so crazy. Even for me, coming from Alaska, I was like, this is way more remote than Alaska. I had no idea.
I don't believe that.
It is. It is. Somehow it is. It was wild for me, and it was winter.
Yeah, well, that's something that we've got to talk about because, look, we are talking about your newly round the world trip, but actually record-breaking trip, adventure. There's so many words to describe this. I absolutely loved listening to you on the way, following you, your podcast, you and Rue chatting along the way, and everyone that you met along the way. It was just so engaging. It was so fun to just tick along. They were just bite-sized, and I just felt like I was there with you the whole time. And I'm assuming you sort of felt that along the way with people. They could tune in with you, and they sort of were up to date with what was going on. You didn't have to do a big load of background stuff.
Yeah, well, that part was funny because a lot of people were listening, but then people weren't. And then I'd find out how people communicated with each other. They're like,
Mm.
my friend told me about you yesterday, and he said, get out your door and go find her. We're like, I just heard about you an hour ago, and then somehow they found me. This was like so crazy. So it was like some people, it was like they come in and they've been listening, they're like my best friend. And then some people
Yeah.
are like, oh yeah, my daughter said, go find her and give her a cookie.
Well, I guess you probably don't really know. What would you prefer? What did you really prefer? Was it nice when people just sort of like were oblivious to the whole thing and you really had to break down the whole trip and tell them everything? Or you liked it when you could just skip to what they were up to?
I kind of liked how I'd never know kind of what I
Yeah,
was
okay.
getting into. Because even with like, I'm riding my bike and it's just regular life for everybody else. So it's like, I wouldn't know if like a cyclist coming towards me was coming to ride with me or if they're just doing their own thing
Mm,
until I see that moment when they turn around.
mm. In front of
They're
you.
coming. They're
Yeah.
coming to see me. Or like people would be just like hanging out and then all of a sudden they'd like lift up a big sign. And then I think some people did stuff just to kind of get a reaction out of me. They do like the funniest stuff, like jumping up and down on the side of the road. And it's like it's not a race. There's nothing else happening, but it's just
Mm.
like kind of this funny little party passing through town. I mean,
Oh
so
my.
basically the background on this is like I decided I wanted to ride around the world. I made a route. It's all on road. And then I was like, had an open invite for anybody to come out and
Mm,
ride any stretch with me. And then I think in the end, I probably rode with people half the time and then
mm.
alone half the time. And I rode with thousands of different people. This was unbelievable. Like all ages. Some people would stay for 100K. Some people would stay for literally 2 minutes.
I do want to get into the nuts and bolts of it. I just want to have a quick little chat because I was like, oh my God, there's so many questions. There's going to be heaps of questions, but the nuts and bolts of it are 7 a.m. on the 27th of May. It all began in Chicago, Illinois, and you headed out on a 108-day adventure. It was 12 hours and 12 minutes later, 29,000 kilometers, 169 18,000 miles. I'm doing it the opposite way that you normally do it on your podcast. You do miles first. I'll do kilometers first. 18,125 miles, 192,024 meters of climbing. That's 630 feet of climbing. You traveled around the world and you arrived back in Chicago where it all started. There's just so much. I want to go straight to actually day 4, if we
Oh,
can.
brutal.
You're in Pennsylvania. It's raining hard. I've recently just gone back and watched this because I remember seeing it in the beginning because I was really closely. As the trip goes on, I feel horrible to say this. You lose track of it and you're like, hang on, I wonder what Lael's up to. 3-4 days have gone. Like you're out there for 3-4 days and I've just been doing my life going, I'll just check in what Lael's up to. Anyway, in the beginning, I was watching every minute. And day 4, tell me about day 4 because I can imagine this was sort of like, whoa, what am I doing? I'm tired already, day 4, and I'm now sick.
Well, I had like 3 giant days. I had basically planned it's going to take me 6 days to get from Chicago to New York, like 2,000 kilometers. Then I had 3 giant days in a row where I was like, oh my God, I'm doing so well. I could move
Mm,
my flight up a day. And
mm.
I did. And then I wake up on day 4 and I felt so nauseous. And I was like, oh, it'll probably pass once I get on my bike, whatever. I just probably feel off. And then really soon I just started throwing up. It's like, oh God. And it was raining. I was throwing up like off the side of my bike. And then I start getting like cuts in my tires and I had them set up
Ah.
tubeless. So there's like sealant spitting out. And I was kind of like seeing sideways because it's happening right now. Like I feel terrible. My my tires are doing something and the weather is like awful. And this was like every single day that first week was there was at some point rain, if not a good portion of the day, all the whole day, and thunderstorms. The day I started was a tornado warning.
Oh my gosh.
The thing is, it's like I choose the start. So it's like I could have delayed. but I didn't even know it was tornado warning. I just knew the weather was bad, and I was like, I'm ready to go.
You can't delay at that point. No
You don't
way could
want
you.
to. I
Yeah,
mean,
no
you
way.
always can, but I was like, it was a headwind. Just like whatever. I was so excited. I didn't even care. I
Yeah,
was like, I'm ready to go. Then I
yeah.
like go on this kind of crazy run for 3 days where I'm just like, yeah, like day two, I rode like what, like 400 plus K, 450K, because I was just going bananas. I was having so much fun. And then day four, I like totally throwing up. And then and then people are coming to find me. And I was kind of
Mm.
like, uh-oh.
I'm supposed to be enjoying this, but I'm
So
not.
bad. I was like, I don't really want people around while I'm like throwing up.
So what's going through your head at this point? Because I,
Oh,
I could imagine you just sort of like, oh my gosh, this is so big. Like, I've got so far to go.
oh, I
How did you
know.
not become overwhelmed?
Well, I did have, have these thoughts during that day where I was like, oh my God, what if every day after this is like this?
Yeah. Of course it's not going to be, but you start freaking
You
out.
start thinking like, and this always happens whenever, it's like it takes me a beat to think, oh, it always changes. Don't worry
Mm,
about it. It's gonna get better or it's gonna change. Even when you're in the highest high, yeah, it's gonna change, you know? So I'm
mm.
like, but that day I was just had these thoughts like, what if every day after this is like this? And I didn't think I would quit. I thought this is going to be a lot harder
Wow.
than I thought, and then this woman comes to ride with me named Leanne. She's like in Pennsylvania visiting her mother, and she's super cheerful and kind. And I was like, Leanne, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she's like, don't worry about it. You're just getting it out of your system.
Oh,
You're gonna be fine tomorrow. Because I'm like, I love climbing. And then every hill that day, I was like, oh, like
no.
I couldn't get up them. It was like half speed, when you're like riding along kind of like zombie-like. I
Yeah.
was like, this is not good. But I'm just gonna keep going. At one point, I had like stopped, drank a Coke, because I always drank Coke, and then like very soon after that, threw it all up. And I was like, oh, that's bad. Like not even a Coke. And I see this like fireworks stand, but that's like empty. It's not the season for it. And I was like, maybe I'll just crawl in there and go to sleep. It's like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I was like,
Oh,
but I was just like kind of like had a goal and then brought it back. I think I ended up riding like 240K, which
still.
is still crazy that I did that. But I was like, well, I got to make some progress, and these actually, then I was alone for quite a bit, and then these really lovely guys came and rode like the last maybe 30K with me.
Mm.
And I was still like having tire problems. And then, but it was like actually like there was a beautiful sunset and these guys were really cool. One of them brought me like a rainbow bagel and prayer flags and all this.
Mm. That's something that I want to talk about too, is that all these different people, and I'm guessing not many annoying ones, great people along the way, even if they were
Yeah.
annoying, even if they were too excited, not excited enough, there was just moments. It was just a complete roller coaster of different
Oh,
things. If you're on your own, you would have
so
enjoyed that
cool.
until you got someone else, then you had them for 5 minutes, an hour, 3 hours.
Oh,
I
it
don't know.
was so cool. I mean, that was so much fun. Different
Mm,
characters and like different bikes, different backgrounds, but people generally came and they were just super positive. And I
mm,
would say, especially in Australia, people
mm.
there are very positive and encouraging. I think even more so than other like widespread. I'm serious. Like I was very surprised. Like they always kind of look on the bright side. They're like, oh, it's gonna be fine, and it's
Yeah, but
like
like it's a headwind and it's
terrible.
raining.
And
Yeah.
it's like throwing me off the side of the road. And they're like, oh, it'll get better.
Oh my
I
gosh.
really enjoyed Australian people. I thought, oh, this place, people are super nice, friendly.
It seemed like as you rode along, you almost got better and better as the longer it went. I could be completely wrong, but it just seemed from vocally, um, as you went and even right towards the end, it was like you could have, and I joked about it, you could have done a second lap because you just sort of got in this groove. Were you like that, or were you just like, is this never going to end at the end?
Oh, that was more like midway. I was like, I don't know if it's ever going to finish. And
Right.
then when I got closer to the end, it was just like everything kind of caught on fire. It was so good. And I was so happy too that I actually felt good because I love finishing strong. It's like the best feeling in the world, you know? So then I was like, basically, 1,000K from the finish or maybe even 1,100K. I was like, okay, I think I can shave a day off this and do it in 3 days. And then even the thought of that, I was just like, yeah. And I
Yeah.
just went crazy. And it was so cool, because I was just like flying at that point. But, that having even the end in sight, it was like, it took forever to get there.
I want to run through a big list of places you visited. And as we go through them, if you feel like you want to, have a little comment here and there, I'd love to. Look, you started out of Chicago, like we said, and you trekked across to New York. We sort of just covered that then, but then you jumped on a plane and headed across to Portugal, and you're in Porto. Now you're doing the big European stint, and going through this just yesterday, again, I was blown away. You went across from Porto into Spain, across to Madrid, up to Logroño and Pamplona before you went across the border to France. Now we're at the bottom of France and up we go. Well, up you go, sorry. Up through Bordeaux to Paris. Now we're in Belgium. Through Bruges and right up to Alkmaar. Friends of mine live up in Alkmaar, so I know it well. Drop back down through Amsterdam and now you're on your way out of Amsterdam through Germany and into Switzerland. This is the first point I wanted to speak to you about, even though we've covered so much there through Europe, was the Stelvio. And I didn't actually I didn't know this. This was a bit that I must have missed it when I wasn't following super tight. But the Stelvio, you bypassed it in the end. Is that
Couldn't
right?
do it. Yeah, because it was covered in snow.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, of course, it's going to be a lot more work to do it, but what a pass. But Switzerland got such a late spring snowfall that it was all closed. And so I had to detour.
Do you remember all this now when you think about it? Like there's so much there going, like as I'm sort of mapping it very, very quickly in about 3 seconds, all the way up through Europe. And that part, like it seems so far, but like when you put in perspective to places like across Canada later on and then even Australia, there's so much you cover in Europe so quickly, countries, towns, cities. It just must be almost like a blur.
Oh, but it is so much fun, like being in the mountains and then being in kind of these iconic cities. And then, and then having locals come ride with me through them. And then some places I visited before. So I was like coming back 10 years later and seeing how it had changed. And this is the thing, like going through, I had really good friends make the route through Europe. And I knew going through cities would slow me down because it's just like tons of traffic. But then you don't want to miss them because they're so cool. So then I'm like, oh, that like experience kind of makes my day, even if it took like an extra hour to get through it. It
something
felt
different.
like that in general, like with the route, it was like, yeah, the mountains are tougher, but then there's so much beauty. And then the cities are slower, but then I like ride through Paris. And then getting to Paris was hellacious. I rode this like pretty busy highway and it was pretty scary, like no shoulder at all. It had like this metal overhang of like if people crashed into it, they wouldn't like crash off the road. I don't even know. And I knew the cars were like not happy with me being there. I didn't want to be there, but I was like, there's no other way to get where I'm going. And then I'm riding this, and then I see a cyclist waiting for me to ride it with me. And I was like, oh, what a saint. Terrible stretch of road. I think he was like thinking, you're going to be better off if there were two of us for safety. And the funny thing too with this, it's like I wasn't allowed to draft ever.
Yeah.
So people are always drafting off of me, including like riding into a headwind in Belgium, where it's like a dozen huge Belgian dudes are like on my wheel.
How often did you have to remind people? Were people sure they were? You did them. Yeah,
I
right.
did have to tell them sometimes. Some of them knew, and then some would ask, and then some would like try to get in front of me, and then I had to do like this like kind of crazy wriggle to get out of their wheel. Because I'm like, I can't ride your wheel. Like I just can't ride your wheel. I can't ride your wheel for 2 seconds. Like I'm just trying to be ethical,
Mm,
about this rule, even though it's like, yeah, it's weird, but I just had to be like, hey, I can't ride your wheel or, do this
yeah.
thing where I would like ride off the back or whatever.
You would have to be the ultimate half wheeler. What about that actually when fresh people came and they wanted to ride next to you and you're like, I'm actually about 10,000 K in. My legs are semi tired and they're coming in for their first kilometer. Was there a lot of sort of half wheeling or people were pretty respectful that way?
Sometimes, but usually not. I mean, it
Yeah.
was like sometimes I would have that thought where I'm like, oh my God, I'm like 200K in, and then this person, and then people are just like rotating through. But I was also like, oh, it's cool, whatever.
Yeah.
Because people would be like on their commute stretch. They'd be like, oh yeah, this is my commute home for 20K. And then they'd get off and then somebody else would get on. And I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool.
Did they give you little bits? I did hear you say this a couple of times, but I don't know how often you did that, where they went, actually, you know what, there's another road right next to us, which is a little bit safe or whatever. Or were you
Yeah.
just like, look, I better not do that because I've got this route, I better stay on it?
I would detour, but then I realized I would always detour because I'm really easy to
Mm,
influence. I'm like, oh yeah, cool, whatever. Because I could,
yeah.
it didn't matter. And I was like, oh, you know a better way, let's do it. But then when I did that, I would miss other people that were waiting for me.
Ah, right. Didn't think about
But
that.
I wouldn't even know that they were waiting because, of course, I
Mm,
wouldn't know. None of it was planned. I talked to a guy on the phone today that was like, oh, I missed you in Bonn by 2 minutes, like in
mm.
Germany, and I talked to him today and I had no idea. It's like people were kind of chasing or trying to find me, or they'd come back the next day and be like, you detoured and I missed you.
Oh, no. Ah, well, what can you do? Yes.
A
All right.
local was there that kind of bossed me around and told me to go a different way. And I was like, actually, they know better. Of course, they know better than I do. And if I did detour, I'd probably see something cool. So, yeah.
It was very hard. Look, let's. There's a couple of places in Europe I want to sort of hear your opinion on because the places I've never been. You went from the Stelvio or around the Stelvio and out. You actually went up the Albola Pass. That's a very hard climb. I
Yeah,
remember
that's a
that from
cool
training.
one. Ah, that's a
Cool
great
climb.
one. Yeah.
And then out of Italy into Austria, across to Slovenia through Ljubljana, Novo Mesto, and then into Croatia and all the way through Bosnia. This is the area that I'm really intrigued about. Bosnia, Montenegro,
Oh,
Serbia, and Bulgaria. Look, I've said so much. There's so much country there that we're talking about, but I've just looped them in one umbrella. Tell me
the
about this period.
Balkans. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, coming into, oh, this was so cool. Both Slovenian border and Croatian border. Right at the border, there was a different woman waiting for me to say, welcome to Slovenia, welcome to
Wow.
Croatia. And I crossed into Croatia in the dark, and there was still a
Oh.
woman there, and I was like, this is cool. And then after that, I think through all those countries I went through, like not in Serbia, but the other ones I went through their capitals, so that was kind of cool.
Mm.
Uh, I've ridden in that area before because I did the Trans-Balkan race,
Hmm.
and it's pretty wild. It's like still like kind of rugged. I saw a bear there racing.
Is it
Um,
scary?
no, but you can see like the history of war.
Mm.
Like some of the buildings, you can see like bullet holes and stuff because it's not that long ago.
Mm.
But I would say from that zone, the highlight really is Montenegro. It's
Mm.
really, really good. They've got a really cool national park, and it's just these beautiful mountains above tree line. So huge views, narrow road, almost no traffic. It's so cool. Like just packs of horses. I mean, that is so good. And I was also surprised by Bulgaria was really nice. It almost was like a bit like Mediterranean or almost like Greece. And it was
Mm.
cool. Actually, it was really, really nice. It had a bit more water. My route through Bosnia was not the best for this.
Mm.
I have
Well,
been there before and I like it. I liked riding like dirt roads there, but this I was like sometimes I'd end up on kind of like more transport routes, with bigger trucks.
mm.
And so then I'd be like, like in Serbia, I had that, and I was like, oh, this is kind of sketchy. It's kind of crazy when you cross borders and you just feel like an instant vibe change.
Isn't it? I can imagine it's so weird. Like I've only just know that for even in Europe, like just from Holland to
Yeah,
Belgium. I know it shouldn't be that much different, but all of a sudden you're like, it's
it
the color of the
is.
line on the road, or whether it's the quality of the road, or the way that the houses look. Instantly, there's a difference.
Right. And then I don't know, I get like sometimes I get a feeling like, oh, like people were happier in this country than that country. I don't know why I feel that way, but I just get that feeling. And I'm like, oh, uh-oh, this is not the best one for me. But it was cool that it wasn't like consistently one direction or another. It would change. Like I'm like, oh yeah, Bulgaria, people are pretty happy. That's awesome. Never been there, so.
Well, lastly, in sort of Europe, I guess you've got Turkey and then Georgia, and you flew out across to Australia. That's what I want to talk to you about a
Yeah.
little bit now, because now I'm going to come under fire. This is it. I felt a little bit of pressure, and I was very late getting you that route.
Yeah, you're under fire. I was under fire. I was like, Mitch, help.
I felt honored that you reached out to me, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I don't really know what kind of route you want. Do you want like a fast route, an easy route? Do you want picturesque? So we put something together and we just went for it. And I was like,
And it was
well, I
good.
hope it's all right.
Yeah, it was amazing. You did that in 2 days. You made me like a nearly 8,000 kilometer route in 2 days. That was unbelievable.
I had a lot of fun doing it, and like that's one of my favorite things to do. But there was a lot of land there that I've never ridden, so I'm glad that when I was listening along, that you took advice from people who live in those areas and went,
Oh,
"Hey, you know
yeah.
what? This is a road, but let's do this road that's close." But look, there's not a lot of roads in Australia, as you found out.
Right.
It's not like Belgium. When you went across, tell me about it. Arriving in Australia, and I know it was a place that you were really
Ah.
looking forward to coming to, getting to Perth, and then like, wow, all right, let's start this Australian leg.
Oh, it was awesome. Actually, there was a couple that lived in Perth, wrote me an email like, hey, we see you're coming here. Can we host you? Do you need anything? And I was actually like, oh, I actually need to ship a new watch to myself. Can you guys receive it? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. And then you can stay the night at our house. And I was like, okay, awesome. Actually, I also should probably get in touch with the bike shop to
Mm.
rebuild my bike was like in the worst shape of the entire trip. I hadn't done anything to like I the last service I had was in like Düsseldorf, Germany. And then I show up to Perth with this like bike that's like basically still, well, okay, this is the other thing. You're supposed to like really clean your bike before you bring it to Australia.
You are, yeah.
So I did. I like because they're like, oh, they won't let you through if you don't do that, even your
And you,
cleats on your shoes. So I actually
yeah.
did clean it in these really, really nice Russian guys had a shop that was basically like the upper room of their cafe in Tbilisi, Georgia. And I had like written them a message like, hey, can you guys help me find a cardboard bike box? And they're like, oh yeah, no problem. So they like stuffed my bike into the tiniest box possible and we got it to Perth. And then this couple comes and picks us up from the airport and they were so kind because Rue was going to rent a car to follow me. And they're like, actually, one of us is going to like lead Rue because we're worried that she's not going to know how to drive on the other side of the road. Totally true. It was, I mean, so cool. They had like made us, like a homemade dinner, and they called the bike shop for me and were like, hey, she's coming in. Can you guys help her out? And then I went there the next day. These guys at the shop, Wembley Cycles, completely stripped the bike down to the frame and rebuilt everything. And I walk out of there with like my bike feeling like brand new. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I'm not going to see another shop till Adelaide.
Well, tell us about all that, because that happened along the trip, and I guess probably people are wondering, how does it go? Are you allowed to, stay at people's houses? Are you allowed to accept meals? Are you allowed to get your bike rebuilt? And what then does it feel like having those extra things? Because a lot of the time you're on the road and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to meet someone. You don't know, like you said, that couple. And rolling out of the bike shop on a brand new bike, practically, how does that feel?
Oh my God, it felt so good. I
Yeah.
was like, you just, having confidence in your equipment. It's like, yeah, I can roll along with like stuff kind of not going right. But then to have it feel like that, I'm like, oh man, I am like ready to go, for the next stretch. And I mean, the greatest thing is like, I like didn't even look ahead to what I was coming up on.
All the time.
No, boy, what's that?
Well, you know what it is now.
Stretch of road. Wait, basically, I like kind of got the picture. I was like, oh, okay, you ride like roadhouse to roadhouse. And then the roadhouses had like a paper list on them with the next ones and the distance in between. And so I just took a picture of that with my phone. And I was like, okay, that's where I get food and water to make it to the roadhouse. I was like, it was probably better that I didn't know in advance, because what difference does it make? It's like, but I will tell you, the stars on that stretch of road are insane. The night sky and the Milky Way, and because it got dark at like 5 o'clock, so I'd see them for a really long time.
So you had a lot, that's right, you had a lot of night riding in Australia, like a lot of dark riding.
Yeah.
And I remember planning the route thinking, I don't know how long you want to ride each day, but this is like literally the next stop. Like it's like 400K.
It was totally fine. And I think also, like, so I'd been coming from Turkey and Georgia, where it was like, mid 30s Celsius, and then Australia, where, the high was maybe like 20 or something. So, but when I started, it was like still like sunny and nice. So I think that was a good transition. And actually all across that stretch, the weather was really pretty good. I think I had some pretty strong headwinds, but not rain at that point.
Not until you got to Victoria.
Yeah, exactly. And then Victoria was like, I didn't see the sun for like a week. I was like, oh, I thought Australia was sunny.
It was bad weather. And I was so sad because, I cheekily planned your route. Well, when you gave me the idea of the route that we were basing it off, the route came right through my town. I could not believe it, because I would have never have thought of routing you through here. It's on the way, but it's just a little town. But the route that we were planning it off came through here, and I thought, well, let's go through Lancefield. Unfortunately, I wasn't there at that point, but you copped the worst possible week you could ever get. It was cold and raining. And you trucked on right through Lancefield. I can't believe it.
I stayed there.
I've got to hear about. I know you stayed here. I was watching your dot. You stayed at the lodge.
Like the lodge, and it was so nice. I loved it. And to get there was like pretty epic. Actually, this really, really nice couple came out. I think it was Port Fairy, that close by, and it was like really raining sideways. And I told them I was going to Lancefield, and they're like, "You can't go there."
It's a long way from Port Fairy.
Where I am, But it was like having those conditions. And then on top of that, when it's like that and it's dark, it's even like crazier, because I'm like totally disoriented, like which way is up and down, like just to get there was like pretty wild. But Lancefield was so cool. And then the next day, actually riding north of there with all those big stones in the fields. And it was, then the weather broke, and it was like a beautiful morning with like fog and this gorgeous sunrise. And I go outside, and there's a guy like in like a totally covered suit, and he's like, I've been riding up and down the street since 5 a.m. for you to it's like freezing to death out there, because it was like it wasn't storming anymore, so the temperature dropped, and it was pretty chilly. Because I had some days there where like my water bottles were like getting kind of slushy. I was like, oh, I didn't know it got that cold here.
One of the things that I loved most was the job that your partner Rue did. The podcast, she was fantastic on the podcast interviewing you, but the stuff she filmed as well, which really painted the picture of a lot of places I haven't been, but places I have been to that really reminded me of where you were. And even just seeing my own country in that light and watching you ride through and hearing the birds and things like that. And I was thinking, wow, we do live in a really lovely place and lucky place to live, but also other places. And having her on the route and on the trip, I know very valuable, and you wouldn't have done it without her, but just sort of tell me a little bit about that, having her sort of see the up and downs of the route and how you
Uh,
look forward to the points that she may be or hiding somewhere and like, oh, you're here.
I know. It was so, so cool. I mean, first I decided I wanted to do this big ride and I was like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to come because it's too long and crazy. And she's like, yeah, you just go do that. That's fine. And then the more I like talked about like the places I was gonna go and what it would be
Yeah.
like, the more excited she got because she loves shooting. I think she's as motivated to take photos and video as I am to bike. So then
Mm,
she's like, I want to be there, but she's like, I want to document it. I want to take video and like do all this stuff. And then I was like, oh, wow. I mean, that's so awesome. But also that's like way more complicated than me just biking. Cause like, I can like
yeah.
carry minimal stuff on the bike and like it's for me to cross a border, I show my passport, I move on. Like, she had to have like a vehicle and then equipment. And, I was just like, okay, well, I think we can do it. And then we just kind of winged it like everything else. And sometimes it was like a little bit crazier, like trying to figure out how to get a car that can cross, all these borders in Europe and Turkey. Ugh. But then Australia was pretty easy because it's one country. So she rented a car in Perth and dropped it off in Brisbane. And that was it, you know?
I
I,
bet the rental company was happy with that. Oh, what are we going to do with this car from Perth? Bugger them. What about some of those things? I'm so intrigued about a few little things. The stops along the way, and you did stop a whole lot of times with a lot of people, and you gave a lot of time to a lot of people. Talk to me a little bit about that because I'm assuming that gave you energy. So the time that you spent or wasted, you could loosely say, actually in return gave you a lot more mental energy because I think it's got to be about mental energy, this effort.
yeah, and I think I just kind of went with my instincts on it because I was like, this is cool. Like, I invited people to come, so I want
Mm,
them to be around. But I mean, really, the ideal was for them to ride with me. Because I'm
mm,
like, oh, then they get to actually participate in it, be a part of it. We can talk on the bike. I'm moving forward. But then sometimes it'd be like, you know, families with little kids.
mm,
And I'm like, oh, I gotta stop, just to
mm.
say hello. They usually like had brought me a little drawing or something. Cute. Or, like sometimes I got the vibe like people are there cheering, like, oh, I can just like wave
Yeah,
and
okay.
like go by, but like so I didn't feel like pressure to always stop or always do something. Sometimes I was like, I also thought I better get a move on. I've got to cover this distance. If I keep
Mm,
stopping, I'm never going to get there. So I was like, I think I just kind of like went with my gut of like what the situation felt like, what I personally felt like. Because I was also like, I got to stay like kind of mentally on top of all that socialization too.
mm,
Like as cyclists, we like alone time too.
mm.
You like time to like clear your head. And so, but I did have plenty of that. And I mean, honestly, some of the stretches in Australia, like people drove like 10, 11 hours to come find me because it's so far away, and I really got the picture of, oh my gosh, it's like there's a town and then maybe in 200K there's another town. And it's like when you're in a town, there's cell phone reception, but immediately
Out.
when you leave, it's gone.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
They live a more cleaner life. I don't know. Well, look, I'm close to Melbourne, so look, I'm not any kind of country bumpkin. But tell me about your mentality. This is something that it was just so amazing for me to listen to, and that was the thing that I love so much listening to you. You're just always in a fantastic spirit, and I was waiting for the day that you eventually. I would have been an emotional roller coaster. You would have heard me cracking the shits. You would have heard me happy, but you were just this generally time, just frothing on the whole trip. And I was waiting for the moment where you went, you know what? I've had enough. This is day is hell, headwind, rain, but you're able to stay on top of it the whole time.
I tried, I had my moments. I mean, headwind, God, it's like, how is
Yeah,
that ever fun?
yeah.
Some people are just better at it. Sometimes I'd be like, I just have to be more like the Dutch. They don't care about wind. But I mean, I really would try. And like often, it's like then I think the main reason I felt pretty good was I was sleeping. A
Mm,
lot of these ultra races, I have like super minimal sleep and I'm like kind of out of my mind. I
mm,
hallucinate. Some of that's kind of fun, but it's not healthy or sustainable. So then this time I was like, I'd set a goal for the day. I'd, ride there and then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do, record the podcast, set an alarm for 7 hours, and then just wake up and eat breakfast and ride. So I think because I had like more recovery, I was like, oh, every day is just like a huge day. I didn't
mm.
worry about like the big picture, or I try not to.
And so logistically, Rue would get some food for you. You'd get in, get some food, eat whatever was there, and the next morning you just get up and have whatever you had around. Or this was quite a lot of logistics, like you said. Like Rue had quite a big job.
I mean, we would try to just like get takeout Thai food or
Yeah,
take out anything
nice.
or what else? Then I don't know if I stayed in like a hotel, they'd usually have like a breakfast. What did I do? Yeah. So it was like trying to just find food that was around.
What about en route, the food? I saw you like you're eating your hot chips. Did you get sick of eating?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a job. But
Yeah.
also it's like chips, those are good. But I mean, I guess the thing is like it's like not fun like mealtime. I'm like
No.
rushing. I'm like eating them so fast. Like I think since I've stopped, like I appreciate just not rushing.
Mm.
And but I ate like a lot of rice and pasta and I ate it was okay. It wasn't like living off of like packaged pastries, so that was good. People would bring me, some baked goods they made or a sandwich or something like that. And that was also really sweet too. Like people put a lot of thought into kind of meeting me. I remember a guy brought me like a pineapple. The whole pineapple. He's like, well, I just figured you probably weren't getting much fresh fruit.
Yeah.
I
Nice. You
was
cut
like,
it up and
hey,
you ate it.
that's nice. Yeah.
Lovely.
A lot of Tim Tams. Actually, Australians would bring me Tim Tams and snakes. There are a lot, or those little like chocolate koalas.
Because you collected a lot of things, and I heard you say this too, that you were just posting stuff home because a lot of people brought gifts and things like that. So you chuck them in the bag and, carry them to a certain point and then I guess box it up and ship it home. Is that what you were doing?
I just gave it to Rue. I was like,
Yeah,
oh, just keep this or whatever,
do with.
because we are like making a picture book with SRAM along with this video we're making about the trip. So then they were like, oh, keep some of the stuff. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, this is cool. People like made me little knit things or signs, and then so we just try to keep some odds and ends. I mean, that's so sweet.
Well, let's keep going and going through this trip. But you went all the way up through country New South Wales, some places that I've got a lot of family through, Young, Dubbo, and then into Queensland, back part of Queensland, and dropped into Brisbane and flew
Yeah,
out
that
of
was cool.
Brisbane. And I think, look, I don't know, but the feeling I got from listening to the podcast was one of the bigger highlights you had was New Zealand. I really
Ah,
felt that in your voice, even though the weather was bitterly cold there, you were past the halfway point, but New Zealand sort of popped up and in a way sort of surprised you. Is that right?
yeah, I did. I'd never been there, and
Mm,
I think, and it seemed like Australians also love New Zealand.
yeah.
As I was getting closer and closer, they're like, oh, you're gonna love New
It's
Zealand.
like a better
It's
version of Australia.
so wonderful there. It's like the like fairy tale version of Australia or something, like, and it was so cool because I was also like a little bit worried about the weather because I was like, oh, it's winter. It actually could be like pretty stormy and cold and windy there. But a huge storm came through like 2 days before I started my ride, their biggest snowfall of the year. And they were like, while I was there, they're opening the ski mountains and stuff. And there was snow on the ground, but not on the road. And because it had just come through, it was really cold, but it was like pretty calm, which I think might be kind of unusual for there. So then I got to see like, these snow-covered mountains and then descending to the coast and these beautiful beaches. And so it just looked stunning. I was like, oh, this place is really, really beautiful. It changes like 20, 30K, entirely different look all the time. So for that, for it being my first time there and for that dramatic constant shift, I was like, this is pretty outrageous. It's so cool. And people are so kind of like country sweet. They're unbelievable. They're
It's
just like
so
all the best, just all the best. And everybody's like they're like so they're like it's part of our culture to be hospitable and like invite people in and just basically treat every single person they met like they're your family. Unbelievable. I was like, oh,
what about the police? I could not believe this.
I know, isn't that so cool? I couldn't believe it either. So then I start getting like police escorts. Like whenever there was like a narrow bridge, there was a
Yeah.
police escort like show up and like tail me so traffic wouldn't come by. And then I found out, and at first I was kind of like a little bit worried. I was like, am I doing something wrong? I was like looking for a bush to pee behind. And then I was like, oh, there's a police person here. I should be like acting better. And then it like turns out I met this guy who was the dispatcher for the police. And he said, I called like everybody on the police force and told them about you and told them to come find you, give you an escort across a bridge, cheer you on. I mean, it started from like the South Island, the entire South Island, it was happening. One woman like brought me a little Coke and a scone to eat. And I was like, from the police? You're joking.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so cool. I couldn't
love.
believe it.
I just loved hearing that. And you went up to the North Island, you flew out of Auckland, and then you sort of in a way, I guess, and I want to hear about your mindset now. Like there was still a long way to go, but you were sort of back on home soil in a way. You were back in Alaska and sort of feeling like, okay, this is the final leg, there's no more flying to be done. But there was still a lot to do. You still had to go all the way down through Canada, through Vancouver, and then do the whole 101 highway all the way along the coast, and then eventually make your way back across to Chicago. But this last leg, what was the sort of feelings? Like, I guess you started to feel like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, yet it was still so long to go.
I was so thrilled.
Yeah.
Flying into Alaska, I get there at midnight. My parents pick me up from the airport. That's where I grew up in Anchorage. And I was just like, I can't believe I made it back here. And then the next morning, I like went to the bike shop, got a bike service. The owner of the shop actually like fixed my bike in like an hour. And then as I'm waiting there to go, people are just arriving at the shop to come ride with me out of town. And then immediately I'm like from the shop onto the most familiar bike path of my life. I've been on there like hundreds, if not 1,000 times. It's like what I grew up on to ride out of town. And then all of the riding, I think it took me like 2.5 days to cross the border from Alaska into Canada. It felt so easy.
Yeah.
I just felt like it was effortless because also I came back into summer again. It had been winter, now it's summer again. It's light until 11 at night. I was like, oh, and I'm in like my home terrain where it's like, I know I've ridden every road. I know all of them. There's a ton of climbing in, kind of high traffic in for a stretch, but I was like, I don't even care. This is so easy. Like I just felt so good.
Did you think about this? Like when you were planning the route, I'm assuming you thought about obviously the way you wanted to do the route and different things like that, but having the summer to start and then obviously coming through home and home roads at a really pinnacle point,
Right.
Potentially if you came to a really hard point at that moment, it would have been a long slog home, but you got this homecoming, the summer again, you went through the winter in the middle, Was this all planned or it's just, as you think about it now, you're like, that was a perfect way it all worked out?
I thought about it in advance where I was like, I think this will feel good to come back to something familiar after being gone for so long. Because other people are like, oh, wasn't it awful to go through home? Like you wouldn't want to keep going. And I was like, well, yeah, it would have been great to just like hang out for a few days. But I was like, I'm on a mission and I was just happy to be somewhere I knew. And that really felt good. And I had thought, okay, then the next stretch through Canada is pretty remote. There's like, bears and long, beautiful roads, but not a lot of communities for a while. And then just a bit north of Vancouver, like through Whistler area, a lot more people started coming to ride with me. And then it was
Mm.
like this incredible momentum of
Hmm.
people down the West Coast.
Yeah.
It's like people, at that point it was like maybe 100 or so people riding with me through the middle of Vancouver on like a Monday afternoon. This was so cool. And they just show up and then the next town, Surrey, so the Vancouver people go back, Surrey people come and ride me all the way to the border. I was like, oh, and they were like, actually, your route's not good through here, so we're gonna make a detour. And I was like, I think you're right. And then, a couple of the women that were in that group were like, oh, we'll cross the border with you. And then there are
Mm.
like people on the US side waiting for me to cross and continue on. It gets dark. I get close to Bellingham. Like a couple dozen people come out with like lights on their bikes and like somebody has like a boombox on their bike and we're riding like a little dirt bike path. I mean, I was like, this is awesome. This is
This
so
is
much
fun.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, you really painted such a fantastic picture of the trip because, like I said again, the podcast it made me feel like this is something anyone can achieve, and clearly
Yeah.
not. It's really hard, but you presented in such a way that it was fun. You enjoyed yourself, and everyone that came along with you really played a part in that
Yeah.
moment
So
to sort
cool.
of adding to the trip. It wasn't just about this. I was reading through earlier about all the different people who have attempted the record, who have got a record or have ridden around the world. There's not that many.
Right.
But some of them, it's all head down, bum up, and, it's not about anyone else but themselves, which is fine,
Right.
whatever. But I really do love what you did with this trip. You really involved everyone. And sure, there was some fast goings and there was head down, bum up, sure. But it was those moments that you allowed this to be a trip that you said in one of your podcasts, hey, I'll never get to do this again, so I'm going to
Yeah.
enjoy this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't believe I got to do in the first place. This
Mm.
is such a crazy trip. It's like so long and kind of expensive. And, I was like in good enough health to be able to do that. And like, I mean, a lot of it, I was really relieved to finish because I was like, oh, I was always kind of in the back of my mind worried, like, what if I get hit by a car or like my bike really breaks or something really, really goes wrong? I was like, so to finish, I was like, yay, it's over.
Yeah.
But I mean, the biggest surprise was like, I actually had fun like pretty much every day, in some way. Like, yeah, there were setbacks and things were hard, but I wasn't like just willing it to be over.
Mm.
I was like, oh, this rocks. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of beauty. I'm having fun with people that are surprising me. And I don't know. It was cool. Yeah. And the thing is, like you say, like it's achievable for people. That was such a goal for me was like people, I'm not telling them or encouraging them to do this, but they could do something kind of like it, or they could like plan their own adventure. I think like what I always come back to is I think people really do want to do stuff that's like out of their comfort zone, that's challenging, and that to like show that it can be that hard stuff can also be fun at the same time. I like that. I hope that more people kind of like see that possibility and go for it.
I've got just a couple of questions for you. Last questions. Thinking back now, you've had not long to think about it, but it's all settling in. And you think about those moments. What were those hard moments or one hard moment where you're just like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing out here and I don't really know if I want to be out here anymore. Did you get to that point and where was that point?
I mean, there were a few stretches of road where I was like, this is kind of sketchy. Like
Mm.
I was on like a pretty big transport truck route through Turkey. And so it was like a lot of like merging with traffic with exits and stuff. And I was just kind of like, this is not really the vision I had for this
Yeah.
ride. Or I had to go through like a few like several kilometer long tunnels that
Yeah.
were
Okay.
like really kind of freaky,
Yeah.
and they
Right.
had like red lights in them. So it's like my flashing red light did nothing for cars to be able to see me or trucks, and so there were like moments like that where I was like, I kind of wish that I wasn't doing this right now, but I have to do this to get to the other side.
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And I was going to say, and then on the flip side, things now, and there's going to be a million of them, I'm sure, but the few things that really stick out that you sort of, I guess, in a way miss, but you in the moment went, I've definitely got to come back here. This is something I want to experience again. I remember you talking about New Zealand, wanting to set up a ride there again. Different places like that. What's a couple that stick out, or one that really sticks out to you, that a really fond memory that you go, that moment there was just something that I'll never forget? I know there's a million. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Gosh, there were so many. And I think the overall thing was like, I've done so much racing where it's like very solo and very remote. And then to add this element of like including people, kind of combining this like personal challenge with like growing the cycling community, or just encouraging kind of like positivity and hard work. I was like, how do I translate that to more of the other stuff I do?
Yeah.
Is there like something I can do like that? The other thing I want to say is I hope that in the races I have in the future, I just sleep more.
That's a good learning point. Yeah.
It's like it felt almost like like an experiment, because I was like, oh, if I like sleep that long, I actually recover and feel good on the bike instead of feeling like a lot of
Death.
pain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that stuff was definitely learning, but I mean, gosh, I can't really even break it down. Like, I think the night before I finished, this like really sweet bike club came and rode with me like into the night. And some of those like night riding, I don't love it, but it is like pretty fun with a group for some reason, or it's more fun. I guess you're like sharing that and talking when you can't see anything around. Solo, not great.
What's the come down been? Lastly, like, what's the come down been? You got it all done, like you said. I'm glad I got that done. I'm glad I got it achieved, no problems, and I got the record, the new record. I know that wasn't definitely not the entire purpose, but it was something in the back of your mind that you really wanted to achieve. So that was great to get that too. 108 days. But now, like, I know myself, if I do a little mission or even just do a massive high when you get there, but ultimately there's a bit of a low afterwards. You're like, wow, that's done. Like, that's sort of, there's a bit of a hollowness. Have you experienced that, or it's just been continual sort of high?
I think I'm trying to be like just a bit conscious or careful about making sure like I'm doing the things in my days now to make sure I feel like happy, and that's like includes like going for a ride basically every day. But like, I even thought about this before I finished. I was like, I'm still going to want to ride because it's like where I feel good and I'm outside and I feel happy and I can think clearly, but I don't need to ride for 12 hours a day. I can ride for like 4 hours a day. That's enough, so that's kind of like where I'm at right now. And like the first day I got home to Tucson, I like went straight up Mount Lemon. And then I get to like the high point and I was like, oh, I'm really sleepy. And I think it was just like I just needed to eat more. I'm like, just like my mood is like kind of dependent on a lot of different weird things because I'm not like in my like rhythm of like constantly like making sure I eat and making sure I stay focused. I'm like more kind of floating. I think that's a good way to come down, but it's also like kind of funny
to break the routine. Yeah, I can imagine. Like, it's a long time, over 100 days. Do anything, like I said to you, you'd forget about you for 2 or 3 days. You're like, oh, that's right, Lael's still riding.
Yeah, I know, but that's good. It's like, I was out there for 3.5 months, so it's like you could skip a month and come back into it. I think people went, they were like, especially when I got closer to like where they live, they're like, all of a sudden you were here.
Yeah. You're like, well, sort of.
I was like, not all of a sudden for me. I've been like biking to here for 2 months.
Oh, God. Lael, look, I'm so happy that you made time to have a chat today. I love talking to you, and I love listening to you on the pod, and it was such a great journey to follow and a massive well done from me. I can't wait to ride with you one time. I was so disappointed we couldn't, but I know that'll happen.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much, Mitch. And thanks so much again for your help with the route. That meant the world to me. I was pretty stressed. And you were like, yep, no problem. Here it is. Because I was like, I don't know anything about Australia.
Well, I'm glad that it worked. Yeah, fantastic.
It was good. All right, awesome. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lael. How can you not love her energy? You cannot believe she has just ridden around the world. She's just so energetic. She's so happy. She's frothing. And she was like that the whole way around. Never once did I hear her complain. Go across and listen to her podcast. It's her daily recap of her journey. If you haven't heard that, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just her feelings along the way. And I challenge you to find one time when she's not feeling on top of the world. She's so good to talk to. I really, really love having her on the podcast. Of course, we did the episode with Lael back in 2022, so go back and have a listen to that episode. That recaps her story up to date, but this episode, as you just heard, is about her around the world trip. So I hope you really enjoyed that. I certainly love talking to her, and no doubt she'll be back on the podcast, and I have to get out and ride with her one time. I can't wait for that to happen. Big thanks goes out to Red Bricks Media who put this episode together. Of course, our major partner MAAP, and I hope to see you down at the MAAP Lab this Sunday or next for one of those training rides. And of course, up at the Dirty Docker. If you don't know about this, get across and check it out. But we have got a whole lot of things going on. On Saturday, we have got the Lanny cross-country run. Saturday afternoon, after that, we've got the Lanny Cross Vegas cyclocross race, which is going to be a lot of fun. Then we've got some great bands opening up. We've got DJ Centipede and the Worms kicking things off into the night. The Fiesta Village is going to be cranking. We've got the Bridge Road Brewers there with a bar. We've also got the Elderton Life in the Peloton wine stand as well. We've got gin from the guys up at Big Tree Gin Distillery. We've got the saunas from Hello Sauna. It's going to be everything on Saturday night. A lot of fun, of course. Pitch a tent, glamp, however you want to stay, up at the Lansfield Park. And Sunday, we're kicking off with Coborsum, the gravel event right around the Cobor Forest, right in my hometown, Lansfield. If you're not here, I don't know what you're doing. It's going to be so much fun, guys. Well, until next week, we're going to bring you an episode from the Race Communique recapping the World Championships. Until then, see you guys.
That iconic music in this episode was composed by none other than the legend Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.